What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, we're going to be talking about Immortal X-Men number 3 by Kieran Gillen and Lucas Wernick. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the truth behind the relationship between Destiny and Mystique. We're also going to talk about what potential futures Destiny sees for the House of X. And we're also gonna finally get an idea of who the true villain, Krakoa, should be worried about instead of Moira McTaggart.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Destiny and Mystique have been together since the early 1900s, even after Destiny had written her fabled Destiny's Diaries that pretty much depicted the future of mutants going forward, a lot of which we learned in this issue was stuff that she had written with some lies draped over them to hide the truth about what was really going to happen. And of course, we know that Mystique was hired by Destiny originally to help her make sense of those diaries that were originally supposedly written in some kind of a code, even a language that no one really knew exactly what it was. Something even Destiny supposedly wasn't supposed to know. But this is all stuff that goes back to Extreme X-Men Volume 1. This is actually where a lot of this information that is being brought back up here originally came from. This issue pretty much puts more clarification and context with Chris Claremont's Extreme X-Men number 1 from back in 2001, something that I wasn't really sure was ever gonna actually be brought to light. This puts a lot of context not necessarily so much on Destiny's diaries, but also puts context on Destiny and Mystique's relationship, as we get to learn a little bit more about why Mystique and Destiny are fated to be together, and more importantly, why Irene, aka Destiny, is so adamant about having Mystique in her life. And it's not just because she is the love of her life. I mean, that part doesn't change. But what does change is we learn in this issue Mystique is a Nexus for Destiny. Now, whenever we have talked about, someone being a Nexus, we usually kind of refer to characters like America Chavez or Scarlet Witch. Whenever we refer to such characters like that Nexus beings, it's basically meant to say that these are characters that can be connected to various points across various realities, times, and existences across the Marvel Comics universe. In this case, it's Mystique, but the reason why Mystique is a Nexus for Destiny is not because she's some grand important character in the overall great scheme of the Marvel Comics universe, but because Destiny's relationship with Mystique anchors a lot of the potential futures that Destiny has seen. A lot of the realities and probabilities and potential futures that Destiny has bared witness to through her visions are all things that could happen, might happen, probably won't happen. These visions could fall under either one of these categories, but what could turn a potential possibility into a certain reality is her relationship with Mystique, because that means it removes a ton of variables. If Mystique and Destiny are together, then all realities where they're not together pretty much become null and void. But any reality or potential future where they are together, that cements that timeline and makes it that much more probable, as opposed to being incredibly unlikely. Now, once again, it's not to say that Destiny and Mystique's relationship is superficial by any stretch of the imagination. No, they still love each other. That love is real, and it's even proven at multiple points throughout this comic. Even with some little silly moments, there's a moment that's alluded to on a couple of different occasions in this comic, not just between Destiny and Mystique, but also a moment where Mystique references that same moment later when Emma tries to be sarcastic in a way that would maybe lighten the mood and maybe cheer Mystique up. Mystique says that no one could ever make her laugh, and that the only one that ever could is laying there before her, i.e. Destiny, and that she's only ever been able to do it once before. And this is actually a reference to something that happened way back in 1991's X Factor Annual number 6. Now, granted, this was back when Fabian Nicieza was on the book and writing it. It actually refers to a moment that occurred in a side story that was written by Peter David. It was in this instance where Mystique was still grieving the death of Destiny, which was relatively recent to that point. It was in this side story where Destiny had promised Mystique that one day she would make her laugh if it was the last thing she ever did. As it turns out, Destiny had laid out very, very precise instructions for Mystique to release her ashes over the side of a boat. And when she did that, the wind blew at just the right time and blew Destiny's ashes directly into Mystique's face. And instead of getting angry, Mystique started laughing, and then she finally realized what Destiny had meant. This is what all of this is in reference to. Another thing that's alluded to here is Destiny's death back in Uncanny X-Men number 255. This is back when Legion had killed Destiny while he was under the influence of the Shadow King. And the reason why she died in what could have honestly been a preventable death had she wanted to, she knew that it was going to happen, but the reason why she never prevented this potential occurrence is because she knew that if she did not die, she would ultimately wind up killing Moira McTaggart early. Knowing this, especially based on the previous lives of Moira, she knew this to be true. And the reason why she allowed herself to be killed is because if she would be allowed to live and she did kill Moira, that means Krakoa would never have happened. And she needed for it to happen. Hence why she didn't tell Mystique the full story about what was going to happen with Krakoa until she was resurrected, even telling her as much that if they don't resurrect me, burn the island to the ground. She did all this because she knew that if she motivated Mystique enough with this information, it would likely result in the outcome that she desired. Now, the reason why Mystique is hovering over Destiny at this precise moment and why Emma is worried for the both of them is because Destiny is receiving a massive amount of revelation. For the first time since the early 1900s, roughly 100 years ago, this was something that was alluded to in the Sinister Secrets from Immortal X-Men number 1. Destiny is getting a metric butt ton of new future visions. The visions that Destiny is awoken to have very huge implications, one of which depicts Krakoa being burned to cinders. Now, this could potentially be related to one of the other visions that Destiny just kind of mentions called the Krakoan dissolution, or it could be any one of the three later mentioned Nimrod extinction events. We also see a vision showing a monument, possibly a headquarters with a statue of Magneto with Apocalypse's head jutting out of the right side, which would be Magneto's left of his helmet, while another head, which I'm not 100% sure who it belongs to, coming out of the other side. We also see another image depicting the events of the upcoming Judgment Day event that Kieran Gillen is going to be pinning, and we also see another depiction of the later mentioned Empire of the Red Diamond. This is basically a depiction of Sinister, seemingly on Bar Sinister, surrounded by what appear to be either clones of Cyclops, Wolverine, Jean, and Emma Frost, or the actual Cyclops, Wolverine, Jean, and Emma Frost just under his control. But knowing Mr. Sinister, it's very likely these are clones, not the genuine article. We also see another vision that depicts Exodus standing over a sea of outstretched hands, likely all Krakoan followers, and this could potentially be the Spark Inquisition that's later mentioned. And I only say that because the Spark is tied to Nightcrawler's desire for a mutant religion, and we all know how much of a religious zealot Exodus is. Or this could even be a new Krakoa that is also mentioned later, or the Unity, or it could just be all of the above. We also see another vision depicting Magic, now transformed into her Limbo form, standing among a burning land, which is very likely Krakoa, with defeated X-Men laying at her feet. This is very likely the Limbic Infernality mentioned later, which is basically Limbic for Limbo and Infernality for, well, you know, all the fire that's laying around her. And then finally, we see another vision that showcases what appears to be Jean Grey as the Dark Phoenix once more. Now, I'm gonna go and say right now, it's kind of hinted at that maybe these are all potential futures that could happen, but as we remember in some of the previous issues of Immortal X-Men, Destiny said that she couldn't really see the future beyond what was going on right in front of her. That was technically a half-truth. She actually could not see anything beyond that point, but now she can, but the result is still the same. She doesn't really see much beyond any of these visions. all she sees is darkness, nothing. She doesn't see any potential futures beyond the futures that she's seeing right now, and that a lot of these, she has stated, are going to happen very soon. She says that no matter what happens, they don't have to worry about Orcus or Nimrod or any of that stuff, or the Phalanx, whatever. They don't have to worry about any of it because it's very likely not going to matter anyway, because their end is nigh, that even in victory, they only get to bask in that glory for so long. There's lots of potential futures that could happen that Destiny just kind of briefly mentions in name only and never really delves any further into this. One of which being the Canticle for Talia, and I wonder if this is Talia as in Talia Wagner, aka Nocturne, who is, for all intents and purposes, a theoretical daughter of Nightcrawler and the Scarlet Witch from an alternate Earth, which specifically is Earth 2182. The naming conventions kind of make a small amount of sense, considering that a canticle is basically just another word for a hymn or a chant, and a nocturne is basically just another word for a song that is typically about night or nighttime or darkness. Could be a coincidence, or maybe it's not a coincidence. We also get a reference to the reign of Apocalypse, which is probably exactly what it sounds like. Maybe it's what happens if and when Apocalypse returns to see what Krakoa has become in his absence. Is it still his dream realized, or is it just another dream deferred? Maybe some parallels to Age of Apocalypse can even be expected. We also see another one called the Broken Sword. Initially, I thought this was in reference to the Cerebro Sword, a sword that technically isn't exactly broken, but came from broken means. As some may remember, this sword was created from the remnants of Charles Xavier's original Cerebro that he was wearing when he was assassinated by Reavers in Benjamin Percy's X-Force #1. Magneto took those remnants of that Cerebro and turned it into the Cerebro Sword, which, depending on artistic license, sometimes looked like it was still a broken thing, but more recently has looked more complete, especially now that it's in the possession of Mikhail Rasputin. That said, speaking of Rasputins, we also have another potential candidate, which I think is actually more likely. The Broken Sword could be more of a reference to the recent events of New Mutants number 25. This is where Illyana's soul sword was destroyed. This could potentially be the Broken Sword of note. I will admit though, as of this recording, I have yet to read New Mutants number 26, which also came out this week, so there could be conflicting evidence there, or there could be corroborating evidence there, and I'll address that when I do the video for New Mutants number 26. We also get a reference to AVX 6, Avengers versus X-Men 6, which another combat between the Avengers and the X-Men yet again. And this is after we're already about to get Judgment Day, which is, the Avengers versus the X-Men versus the Eternals. So technically even that is another AVX sequel. So yeah, I don't really remember exactly the number of times the X-Men and the Avengers have squared off with one another. They have definitely had Avengers versus X-Men, X-Men versus Avengers, type stories in the past, but they typically were more like just brief battles before they all just ended up working together. So I don't even know if those count, but if those do, then it's not as high of a number as it might seem, which I'm gonna go on a limb and say that's probably what's happening here. We also get a mention of the Dominion of Orcus, which is exactly what that sounds like. We also get another one that is called the Immolation of Judas's, which is probably a victory for Krakoa against their seemingly clandestine nemesis that have been popping up as of late. We also get a mention of Legion 12. I don't know if this could be another X-Men Legacy style event, some kind of a spiritual sequel to that X-Men Legacy arc where Legion had lost his whole damn mind. We also get a mention of something called the Storm System, which honestly, it kind of just sounds like Storm striking out on her own and creating her own kingdom beyond the stars, very similar to the Soul System, which she is currently the regent of, but maybe this could be Storm turning the Soul System into the Storm System, or maybe not, who knows. But right now Storm is very disillusioned with being a ruler, so something very drastic has to be happening in X-Men Red for her to change her mind in the relative near future. We also get a reference to something called the Cassandra Supernova. Maybe this is in reference to the Dark Phoenix that's depicted earlier. She's currently in space with the Marauders, dealing with the Shi'ar and the Ken Crimson, and we all know how the Phoenix likes to be around stuff like that. Maybe the Dark Phoenix we saw wasn't necessarily Jean Grey, maybe it was Cassandra Nova. We did see that the hair that was depicted on the character seemed to be very emblazoned. It didn't seem to be like hair, but like actual fire. So when Jean was typically the Dark Phoenix, she actually had a full head of hair, and we know that Cassandra Nova is as bald as I am. So maybe that is a connection there. And I also did wonder if maybe this could be even a potential reference to some things that happened in the Heroes Reborn event that happened just this past year, where something very similar, not exactly the same, but something very similar seemed to be going on. And while they did tease that there was going to be a continuation to that one shot, we never got that. And I wonder if that was just them being coy or tongue-in-cheek, or maybe there is something to be gleaned from that reality. Maybe Cassandra Nova finds that other Cassandra Nova from that theoretical alternate reality. And then we also get a reference to something called the Expanse, which is not related to the TV series of the same name. This just seems to kind of be a culmination of all of the various futures that Destiny has recently seen leading up to a fiery finale. One that seems to take place at the far-flung future, or at the very least, the far-flung reaches of space. Something that she even refers to as the furthest reach of a mutant church empire. And as all that is stated, she does mention that if she strains her powers enough, that if she reaches far enough into the future, she does actually see something. And what we witness is a spaceship that is literally covered in what is referred to as the cloned meat and muscle mass of Sebastian Shaw. Literally the flesh of dozens upon dozens, maybe even hundreds of Sebastian Shaws, and their skin being used as a kinetic shield, because as we know, Sebastian Shaw's power allows him to absorb kinetic energy and then use that same energy to empower himself. This skin very likely serves the same purpose, and as one might imagine, there's only one individual in all of mutant anything that would ever do something like this, and that is Mr. Sinister. Sinister here is referred to as the Genecorsair, something that is also a reference to one of the visions that Destiny had brought up about Genecorsairs, basically people who have stolen the genetics of others, which very much describes Mr. Sinister. And Mr. Sinister is not alone in this particular point, because as we do later see, that there's also the character Exodus. Exodus is also present in this and seems to be possessed of the power of the Phoenix Force, and he also seems to be possessed of, and I'm checking my notes here, he is bloated by the faith of trillions of mutants. For those curious about what exactly is going on with Exodus here, why is he all juiced up on power, this has actually been hinted at as recently as the previous issue of Immortal X-Men #2, as well as even addressed in Legion of X #2. In both of these series, seeds have already been planted that Exodus's powers are based upon belief. The more faith that he has in himself, the more power he commands. But where Legion of X comes into play is that in that series, we recently learned that gods thrive on belief and faith. Now, this being said, it's nebulous as to whether or not Exodus became a god himself or has been elevated to godhood based on faith, but in that series, it is revealed the more followers of faith that that person has, the more powerful they become. And since Exodus's powers are already based on his own faith and belief in himself, that just makes even more sense. We have the A and we have the Z, we just don't have the B through Y yet as to where and how he got to this position of power. But considering all the other things that have been brought up, it's very likely that the church mutant state that was just referred to, that very likely has something to do with it. That and the Spark Inquisition very likely have something to do with it. And what Exodus is there to do is to punish Sinister for the desecration that he has caused across the cosmos, stealing the genetics of other mutants, and even for the monstrosity that he has created in the form of this Shaw shield that he has on his spaceship. Another thing that happens here is that Exodus refers to Sinister as Judas Prime. meaning that he is very likely the leader of the Judases that we have seen up to this point. Now, he could also be using Judas in a very different term, but Judas is a very specific term that has been popping up lately across the current line of X comics. We know that characters like Brimstone Love are considered to be a part of this. We also know that the character Martinic, as was revealed in Giant Size X-Men Thunderbird, that he was apparently a Judas himself, and he was writing a letter to what he referred to as a friend and fellow Judas. Now, this could very all likely stem back to some stuff that's going on the X-Men side of things, because as we know, very recently, there is a Sinister clone who apparently claims to be the real actual Sinister before he, quotey fingers, tainted himself with the X gene of Thunderbird. That's a lot of coincidence going on here, especially considering everything going on with Thunderbird recently, his recent return, this other Sinister that's been walking around who is referring to himself as Dr. Stasis, and we also have all this going on right here. It's almost too much coincidence to not be taken at least a little bit seriously. But it's also in this moment that as Exodus is about to destroy Sinister, once and for all, everything goes black, and Destiny recognizes this as being very similar to what she would witness whenever Moira would die and reset the timeline. But as Destiny and Mystique both know, Moira is no longer a mutant, and even more importantly, Moira is supposed to be dead now, neither of which is exactly 100% the case. As we learned at the end of Immortal X-Men #1, that Sinister has created multiple clones of Moira, and apparently, somewhere down the line in the future, while right now, he is currently killing off the cloned versions of Moira that he's created when their X genes activated so that he can reset the timeline, which apparently he has already done about roughly 25 times prior to this issue. We know for a fact that in the future, Sinister is going to just take Moira's X gene for himself, very likely taking it at a certain point so that he can get multiple lives out of it and then cloning yet another Moira at a very early stage, because it's said that Moira can only have like 10 lives. That ability to reset the timeline only works about roughly 10 times. So he's very likely taking those Moiras and just getting new X genes from them and splicing them into himself so he can reset the timeline as many times as he wants. This makes Sinister an even more dangerous threat than Moira right now, because as it stands, Moira is no longer a mutant. She doesn't have the ability to reset the timeline. However, she does have the ability to cause tons of problems for the X-Men going forward, because she is now working with Orchis. But this is an entirely different problem. This is a problem from within, and right now Destiny is trying to navigate everything, because as it stands right now, pretty much everything is going from sugar to shit. All the secrets in the Quiet Council are just falling out of the sky. The secrets surrounding how Mystique manipulated Hope and Mr. Sinister into getting Destiny resurrected, all of that is coming out now, as well as other secrets that probably no one really wants to get out, not to mention the debate about whether or not other Krakoans outside of the Quiet Council, whether or not they should know the truth about how Krakoa was founded and what the future holds for them. And while, yes, I agree with a lot of the things that are being brought up here, the counterpoints to the points that Xavier's making, I also kind of agree with Xavier's counterpoints that if they did bring everybody in on this, who's to say that Krakoa would have worked in the first place? But at the same time, we'll never know because they never tried. So it's one of those deals where it's kind of a both sides are right deal. Kate Pride is right that Professor Xavier is putting off some serious Professor Xavier is a jerk energy, which I thought was funny because she's even making the exact same stance, is standing in about roughly the exact same stance and pose. All of that is pretty much almost picture perfect from the time she originally said this back in Uncanny X-Men number 168, all the way back in 1983. Truth of the matter is, even with all this infighting, Destiny reveals that they have to be a united front. However, Destiny can only tell the Quiet Council so much, because if she says too much, Sinister will figure out that she knows what's going on, and he'll reset the timeline, and she'll have to do all of this all over again. The thing that makes all of this so very heartbreaking in all of this is that the reason why Destiny is not seeing any futures beyond a certain point, only seeing the very end of things, is because, as she points out in this book, the new diaries that she is writing detailing all of the information and revelations that she just recently received, she doesn't want Mystique to read any of it, because whatever happens next, Mystique is not going to be around for any of it. This is why she sees no future, because as she has even said herself, Mystique is her future. Mystique is her Nexus. That means not only does this open up Destiny to all sorts of potential possibilities and the world itself to futures that could either be true, fiction, they could be likely, unlikely, or highly probable or highly unlikely. Not only that, but Destiny loses the love of her life. And without Mystique, as Destiny puts it, there is no future. Not in any way that matters to her. This is what makes Destiny's new revelations that much more heartbreaking. Yeah, sure, all of these things are crazy and just all way out there, but the fact that Destiny knows that Mystique won't be around and there's nothing she can do about it, nothing she does can change any of this, this makes all of this even more messed up for Destiny, if no one else. I mean, and this isn't everything. I think I might, and maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but I might do a separate video kind of delving a little bit more into what I think about these potential futures, because it is a lot to take in. It's a lot to break down, so I totally get it. If you see that, you're just like, oh my god, I don't know what to make of any of this. I totally get that. But with that said, that is everything I want to talk about in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you want to see more awesome videos like this, when I post videos like this throughout the week, breaking down comics and comic book characters, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, tap that notification bell. That way you don't miss anything. And of course, if you missed this past week's Blerd Cave, you missed probably what is easily one of the greatest comic book YouTube crossovers in the history of comic book YouTube. So make sure you click that video up here and go check it out. In the meantime, let me know what you guys thought about Immortal X-Men #3. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.